This episode is a tribute to the late Anthony Lees.
You're now listening to a very special episode of Retrogame Talkshow, which we didn't intend to do until sometime later. However, due to unforeseen circumstances, we decided to postpone the intended 16-bit introductory episode and do an episode about the Last Ninja trilogy instead. I'm Jari Karjalainen.
And I'm Bob Engstrand. And I have to say, it feels great to be back again. As you all know, we've been having a little break from the podcast because of our work, traveling and such. But both me and Jari knew that even though the break was necessary, we would come back to the podcast when the time was right. And now it is.
Finally.
Old and new listeners, welcome back. Today, when we record this episode, it's the 22nd of August. And I checked up that our latest episode was released 22nd of May. It was titled Random Ramblings. It's been a long break and thus feeling extra good to be back.
Yeah, I also have to mention, this summer has been just brutally hot here in Finland. So for any possible free time we might have had, they were mostly impossible for studio work due to extreme temperatures, but regardless of that, I have to say it's been nice to have a properly warm summer since forever.
Yeah, this was an extremely hot summer, I think in all Scandinavia. We had about a month of brutally high temperatures, and just what you said, my studio where I do all my recording has been painfully hot, and I haven't even had any chance to be here for like a month. But now the autumn is showing small signs of its arrival, and now we have sort of a normal, fresh summer weather going on. So it's a little bit more fresh in the air at the moment. So
yeah,
it doesn't mean that it's snowing just because we're in Finland, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, about the podcast, I've been looking at some of the statistics of our followers, and we're having more and more subscribers for every week. There is this podcast app that I'm using called Podcast Addict, and you can see there how many people have subscribed it from that specific app, and I think it's above 300 subscribers at the moment.
That's very good.
Yeah, it's good. We've only done, 5 episodes, I think. So I think that's a pretty good result so far, you know.
Definitely.
Also, Retrogame Talkshow is now also available on Spotify and iHeartRadio. So that's that.
Yeah, that's great news, because now you can choose to listen on us on an even wider variety of podcasting platforms. Yay!
Yeah. Now to something a bit more serious for a change. A few weeks ago, we learned about Anthony Lees passing away in a traffic accident already back in 2016. But this tragic news didn't hit the game community until recently. Anthony was the co-composer of the Last Ninja 1 soundtrack. And because of this, he made a huge impact on the gaming industry. And for this, he will never be forgotten. Me and Jari both feel like dedicating this episode to Anthony and his legacy is the right thing to do. His music played a huge part in our childhood.
Huge, very true. So our condolences to the family and friends. Now, getting into the games themselves, I'm actually going to start with the music since it's how the trilogy starts. And what we heard at the very beginning of this episode is the first tune in the soundtrack of the first game, and it plays when the first level of the game is loading on the C64. And now this is a Ben Daglish composition, but we'll definitely get into Anthony Lee's stuff later on. But to me, this composition is like how would I put it? 1987 rendition of of a sunrise in an uninhabited Japanese valley during the 1600s. I think it adds a nice movie-like sort of poetic feel to the whole thing. It just gives me the chills every time.
Yeah, that was a nice description. Yeah.
Retrogame Talkshow.
For people who aren't familiar with the Last Ninja series, what have you guys been doing all your life? No, but let's try to sum it up for you guys. Between 1987 and 1991, London-based developers System 3 released 3 games in the Last Ninja series that became one of the most recognizable milestones in the Commodore 64 scene, with its first game, The Last Ninja, being one of the best-selling games for the platform.
Yep. And if we want to go into the plot line of the series, it all starts with a revenge story. Very sort of default thing for these kind of things.
Yeah.
Where the evil shogun Kunitoki kills all the ninja in your area with the exception of Aramakuni, which is you. Aramakuni! Which is you. So your mission is to, of course, hunt him down. And this all takes place assumedly in the late 1800s or so. Now, well, the later episodes of the game just follow the same plot line in different environments, such as a modern-day city environment, actually New York City in the second game, and the third game is somehow themed around different elements, I think.
Oh yeah, the Last Ninja 3, every stage is an element like fire, water, earth, air. I think all the 3 games have their own color and feel to them, I think.
Yeah. And of course, if you're completely unfamiliar with these games, we're basically talking about isometrically viewed action adventures with a very specific sort of control scheme to it. And speaking of which, the controls seem to be a point of annoyance and frustration to many gamers out there for whatever reason. I admit it's not as simplistic as, say, Night Lore, Head Over Heels, Cadaver, etc. But once you're familiar with it, it's just as much like second nature to you as any other game you put a bit of time into.
Yeah, the combat controls aren't that comfortable, and personally it gave me a reason to develop a skill avoiding battle in many cases, running and somersaulting past enemies.
Yeah, that's a good point that gets easily overlooked since this is an action game. One might assume that you would have to kill every enemy in the game to complete it, but that's not really necessary, is it?
Yeah, the series focuses pretty much on finding objects, solving tricky situations. I think these elements made the games so great.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a brainless brawler game. You know, personally, I consider the games to be more adventure games than a straight-up ninja game. You know?
Exactly, yeah. And also, since you're given no scores whatsoever at least in the first game, you really don't need to focus on killing on that point either. Oh, by the way, did you know that you can change the control style in Last Ninja 2 by pressing the J key?
No, I've actually never pressed the J key playing that game, any of those games.
I only read about it recently, after having played the game trilogy for about 30 years. Although I have to say, I haven't tried it out yet on the C64, but I did have to do that in the Spectrum version, because it uses an alternative control method by default. And just to be clear, this works in Last Ninja 2 only, not the other 2 games. I guess System 3 must have gotten complaints about the control system being too complicated, so they added alternatives for Last Ninja 2. I have to admit, the original control method can be, let's just say, stupidly difficult to explain to anyone, even those who know and understand it as well as we do. But for me, it's always been sort of 3 forwards and 3 backwards diagonals in all 4 directions the ninja is walking into. And when you keep all those diagonals in mind, it's pretty easy to get through all the swamp and rivers jump-in sections. And just to be clear, there are 2 optional control methods which make the ninja walk into straight diagonals in 2 different ways. In one method, pushing the joystick up makes you walk up right diagonal, and in another method, up is up left diagonal, and neither method requires you to make any specific turning maneuvers like in the original control method it does.
Wow, there was some. Yeah, there was some. Let's rewind and listen to that again. Requires you to go up and left, right corner, south.
So
Yeah,
what?
but
Exactly.
Now, but now when you mention it like this, I mean, the controls in the games are pretty complicated. I've never really thought about it, but pushing the joystick up will make you walk either northwest or northeast, depending on which direction you're facing.
Yeah.
So this could probably be kind of frustrating for ninja rookies, but damn, I mean, we got used to all those things so fast when we were young. We never even discussed the control system. We just learned to play the game without ever questioning, the game mechanics.
Yeah.
I think this goes to say about most of the games back in the days.
Exactly. But hey, how about we pick another song to properly listen to?
That's a great idea.
Cool. We've had one of Matt Gray's compositions from Last Ninja 2 playing in the background. Is that from The Basement, right?
Yes, it's the loader to the Last Ninja 2 Stage 4, the basement level.
Okay, so how about maybe we should take turns in DJing, and you take your pick now, and I'll take the next one.
Okay, sure. Yeah, here is one of my favorites from Matt Gray's soundtrack for Last Ninja 2, Central Park Loader track.
Great stuff. Classic start for another classic game, the first sequel in the trilogy. And now I want to talk about loading music in general, particularly regarding the first game, because if you only had a disc version of The Last Ninja 1, you would not hear all the music from the soundtrack. For example, the very first song heard in our podcast today wasn't featured in either of the disc versions of the game. Not the System 3 version, not the Activision version. And that said, I think there's definitely something very special about the tape loaders in the first two games in the series. The Last Ninja and Last Ninja 2 were both prime examples of how to compose a game soundtrack to its full potential at the time, since you had to bring some kind of atmosphere through music to get hyped up while the game was still loading each level from cassette. And loading from a disc wouldn't necessarily allow that. At least I don't think there were too many games on the C64 at that point that were able to feature loading music. Not that it would have had much sense due to the shorter loading times, but I also think playing these kinds of games from a cartridge would not only shorten the soundtrack by half, but at least in my opinion, it will also definitely lessen the value of accomplishment in progression.
Yeah, I agree with absolutely everything you said there. I mean, it's an interesting aspect. You play the game on tape cassette, so the penalty is that you have significantly longer loading time, and that can be rough. But System 3 turned those loading times into a soundtrack magical heaven. I mean, I could just sit there and stare at those ninja eyes while listening to those soundtrack, and the loading times never felt too long thanks to its great soundtrack.
Yeah, and taking loading times and music into consideration, I think we can both agree that the Last Ninja games are meant to be played primarily on the C64, maybe even only on it.
Yeah, I have only played the series on Commodore 64, so for me those are C64 classics. I do remember trying out Last Ninja 3 on my Atari ST in maybe 1993 or so. And I remember thinking, this is supposed to be a better computer, but what is this? You know?
Yeah, I can relate to that. My first experience of Last Ninja 3 was on the Commodore Amiga, actually, around the same time. And I remember having the exact same thoughts. But the thing is, though, the trilogy and, the first two games in particular were such huge hits for the Commodore 64 that people wanted to get their slice of the Ninja success on other platforms where at all possible. The first game was ported for all the available Acorn machines, the BBC Micro, the Electron, and even the Archimedes a bit later on. And it was also converted for Apple II and Apple II Game System, and the IBM PC compatibles, the DOS machines, and finally for our favorite 16-bits, the Amiga and Atari ST. Although the Amiga and ST versions were released as Ninja Remix. And Last Ninja 2 also found its way to the Amstrad CPC machines and Sinclair ZX Spectrum computers. And what I think most importantly, the NES, even though the NES version is murderously awful in all possible manners, I have to say.
Yeah, I suspected you would sit on a lot of cross-platform information thanks to your good old comparison blog you had, yeah.
Yeah, well, I only made a comparison of the first game for the Finnish Retrogame comparison blog. But yeah, these things get you a bit dig-dugging a lot of information.
Dig-dug.
But the reason I brought it all up is because I think we should also have a small earful of how the game sounds like on other platforms, just to get an idea of the differences. So here's a few examples I've compiled for everyone to enjoy, starting with the ZX Spectrum version of the Last Ninja 2 title theme, since it has no other music in it, even in the 128K mode, and then moving on to the first in-game tune from the NES version, and then we have an example from the Amiga version of Ninja Remix, so let's check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really cool. I hadn't actually heard any of these versions before we started to work on this episode. The Spectrum version sounds pretty horrible, and I get absolutely zero ninja feelings from it. I don't even know what that's supposed to be. The Nintendo version is pretty cute, I think. And of course, the Amiga sounds like an Amiga. Fat digital 80s drum samples punching away.
Yeah, they're all very different, and we've only scratched the surface here. And digging is very much recommended, even if you hit some crap every now and then.
Absolutely. I remember when you sent me the MP3 of that Spectrum version. I remember that I asked you, is there something wrong with the MP3?
Retrogame Talkshow.
Okay, it's time to get more personal. So, tell us, Bob, how did you learn about The Last Ninja for the first time, and when did you get first contact?
The very first time I got in contact with The Last Ninja was the same year it was released, back in 1987. I was 11 years old in 5th grade, and in my class there was one more computer game geek, and he brought the cassette tape box with him to school. The original game, without a warning, he just showed it to me at the lunch break, and I was immediately hypnotized by those ninja eyes on the front cover.
Yeah.
I turned the box around and I saw screenshots, from out of this world. It was the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I am not sure about this, but I don't think that I had read or heard anything about this game before that very moment. Because I don't think I was yet a subscriber of the Swedish computer magazine that we spoke about in a previous episode. So this game just sort of spawned out of the blue for me.
Yeah, that's funny. It's almost like how it happened to me, but yeah, continue.
Yeah, a week or so later, my friend lent me the cassettes. The original cassette box contained 2 cassettes.
Yeah.
Tape 1 was identical on both sides, and tape 2 was identical on both sides. So both tapes side B was sort of a backup for the side 1. So you needed both cassettes to play the game. Today it sounds kind of strange to have identical side A and B, instead of just spreading the game levels to one single cassette. But you will soon hear why this was a good idea by System 3.
Yeah, I know where this is going.
Yeah, the first thing I did when I got home with the tape cassettes was to ask my dad to make copies. I was such a criminal when I was 11,
Yeah, but so were we all. I mean, we didn't know at the time, nor did anyone care. It was the norm, really, as I think we pointed out in an earlier episode. Things have definitely changed in that regard.
Yeah, and my dad, he had one of those 70s Sony reel-to-reel vintage tape player recorder. Just for you hopeless geeks out there, it was the TC377 model, made in 1973. So there you go.
So you guys made copies of the original C64 tapes using a reel-to-reel tape recorder as the transfer, and recorded it back to empty cassettes from the TC377 to whatever home stereo system cassette deck you had, right? That must have taken literally ages.
Yeah, I know. And still to this day, I actually don't know why we went through that procedure, because I think we had a double-deck player recorder at home. But again, this was 31 years ago, so the details are kind of blurry,
Understandable. Still, that's kind of harsh, man.
Yeah, the 80s were harsh times, Maybe my dad wanted to keep that reel-to-reel player in use, find a meaning of it. Anyhow, I played the game using my friend's original tapes, and when I had completed the 3rd stage of Last Ninja 1. Do you remember what the level 3? Do you remember the name of that level?
Of course, it's Palace Gardens.
Palace Gardens, yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, we can hear that soundtrack in the background. When I had completed that stage, the level prompted me to change to cassette tape 2.
Yeah.
And the dungeon, level 4, called the dungeon, started loading. And load error. We've all seen that before. That wasn't really anything new. Load error, well, okay, I just have to start over the game from the very beginning, So I did many times, and load error every time I tried to load the dungeon. Even though by that time I consider myself a tape cassette screw adjustment expert, But still, I just continued to fail every attempt, and I even remember calling my friend, desperately, and I asked him, "Hey, did you have any issues loading the dungeon level?" And he said he didn't have any problem. And I started to become desperate. I needed that progress. I needed to, see what the rest of the game looked like. And I think it was my dad who came up with the idea of, trying out the tape 2 side B, which was identical to the side A, sort of a backup. And I managed to load the dungeon on my first attempt. So we came to the conclusion that the tape 2 side A was faulty.
Yeah, I do remember having very similar experiences. For a long time I couldn't figure out what was the deal with having 2 tapes and all that, because the print on the tape label was so little that I couldn't realize that both sides of each tape were the same side, sort of recorded, as you said. And I remember having to actually listen to the screech data on the home stereo to hear the differences, what I was missing, because the dungeon level wouldn't load at first, obviously, The tape 2 side A turned out to be faulty on my tape as well.
Yeah, so. I mean, 2 things. It's freaking unbelievable that you had the same issue with tape 2 side A.
That's weird.
Yeah, and now the other thing, now when I remember why we used the reel-to-reel player.
Okay.
I think we tried first with the basic double-decker tape recorder, but when I still couldn't load the dungeon level, I think we tried out with the reel-to-reel to see if that for some reason would make a better copy or something along those lines,
Yeah, perhaps. It's definitely possible that you could maybe get a better quality copy using a reel-to-reel recorder, but I know for a fact that it couldn't have helped in this case.
Oh yeah, now we know that. Just the fact that we both had issues with tape 2 side A is a strong proof that something was up on the System 3's cassette copying method.
Yeah.
But again, smart of them to make identical copies on side B. Not exactly identical, because one side was faulty, but,
exactly.
Small audio differences, but huge difference in loading results.
Weird stuff.
Yeah.
But hey, if this problem occurred in any of the other copies for you listeners out there, we could come to a more comprehensive conclusion about how bad exactly System 3's cassette copying method was.
Yes. Please let us know if you guys experience the same problem with loading the dungeon level. Pop us an email at retrogametalkshow@gmail.com.
Retrogame Talkshow.
Anyhow, that was a little peculiar story of how I got in contact with the game. Jari, please share your moment.
Actually, my first contact with The Last Ninja was not long after getting my own Commodore 64, because there was a guy in our village in Norgam who had the first C64 I ever saw, as I told in a previous episode, and I played on it the first time, and all that. But he sold us a huge lot of his old original C64 games for whatever reason, and The Last Ninja one was included in that bundle. And this must have been early 1989 or so, maybe January, February, or whatever. So I was kind of late into the game in that sense, I guess. And hearing about the game, loading it up, playing it for the first time, all happened only after I had gotten my own original used copy of it. Talking about good luck right there. Unfortunately, I have long lost the cover leaflet for it, and the label on the second tape is worn off, but I tested these tapes quite recently, about 3-4 days ago, and they still work. I completed the game using those tapes.
Yeah.
But as I said, my experiences with the tape loading were much the same as yours, so there's nothing new to talk about there. But I don't know, something else perhaps worth mentioning from my old memories is how I learned to play the game. Of course, the controls took a while to master, particularly for the swamp and river jumping bits. And I have to say, having a proper joystick helps a lot. As for using the items you collect on the way, I managed to read lots of hints and tips from gaming and computer magazines, so I got the easy way out in that sense. And the only real struggle was getting to grips with the fighting moves and learning how to deal with different enemies.
Oh yeah, so you didn't do like me, just escaping battle. You actually went into the fight.
Well, I had to learn the hard way, you know.
Oh yeah. By the way, do you remember what joystick you were using playing the game for the first time? Because I know that I used my Wiko the Boss.
Well, it must have been one of those flappy Quickshot joysticks, either Quickshot 1 or Quickshot 2 Turbo. I can't remember exactly which one. I got my first good joystick later on in 1989. Actually, it was 2 joysticks because we got a pair of Competition Pro 5000s.
So you said this was 1989. So you said that you got into the game like a little bit like 2 years later it released. But of course you have an excuse for that. You're younger than me also. You were born in 81, correct?
Yeah, and we got the C64 much later.
Oh yeah. But like this was 89, so The Last Ninja 2 had already been released when you found the series. So how long did it take before you realized that, hey, you have another amazing ninja game to play? Do you remember anything of that? Because for me, I couldn't wait for Last Ninja 2 to be released, you know?
Yeah, I can imagine. But this might sound a little bit weird, but I didn't actually know about Last Ninja 2 existing and, it being a series until many months after I had played the first game through, which must have been like during the summer 1989. And even then it was by a magical coincidence. I don't know why or how, but someone had dropped a loose original tape of Last Ninja 2 by the side of the road. I can't remember exactly where it was, but I picked it up. I took it home, loaded it up, and wham, another masterpiece to get through without the trouble of spending money or tape-to-tape copying.
Holy cow. I mean, if I wouldn't know you personally, I would never believe that story. I mean, you're walking around in a small village in the northern part of Finland and finding a Last Ninja 2 original cassette on the streets. That's insane, actually.
That's completely random, but that's how it happened. And to my knowledge, at least, no one ever came looking for it. It seemed like fate to me.
Oh, yeah. Hey, picture proof or it didn't happen. No, but
I now have the original with the box too, so there's no actual evidence for that anymore.
So you didn't do the morally right thing and wrote a note and put it on the local grocery store wall. Cassette version of Last Ninja 2 found on the streets.
Well, you have to consider, I was like, what was I, 8 or 9 years old at the time. I still didn't have morals back then. And I don't know, I remember thinking that if someone threw it away or disregarded it like that, that person doesn't deserve to have the game anyway,
Yeah.
And besides, I wasn't really on friendly terms with most people back in then anyway, so I just couldn't bother.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I forgot we were criminal kids, making copies of games and stuff like that.
Exactly. But hey, it's time to listen to some more music. I think it's your turn, right?
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna pick the very first track from the Last Ninja 3 intro.
Great.
Written by the Dutch composer and multi-instrumentalist Rein Ouwehand.
Ah, that's a great theme tune. What an amazing intro sequence for Last Ninja 3. But you know, Rain looks a bit like someone I work with.
Oh, I think I know who you're talking about, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he's listening to our podcast, but I'm talking about your friend who looks like Rain. If Rain is listening, hey Rain, great to have you online, on the air with us. But it's a great track.
Yep.
And Rein Overhand, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but Rein Overhand sure knows how to program sounds and music on the C64.
Definitely.
And by the way, I have a little story about Rein I would like to tell.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
About 5 years ago, me and my dad had just finished building our second Commodore 64 stereo synthesizer. And
second?
Well, we thought that one wasn't enough, and I wanted to have a different panel on this one, Because the second one I did look so much cooler. But anyway, I released a track that I had composed and recorded using only sounds from that synthesizer, and both the synthesizer and that track were mentioned in some tech magazines and such. It got some spread on the web, among geeks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And a few weeks later, I received a message from Rein Overhand to my Facebook artist page, complimenting me for my creation and asking me if I was selling any of the C64 synths that we had built. And well, I wasn't selling, but it gave me a reason to thank him for his contribution to the C64 music scene. I think it's a fun little story.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, maybe you should start a production line for C64 stereo synths.
Well, I think the planet is running out of authentical SID chips, and we shouldn't overdo it, We have to be environmental.
Yeah, true enough. Well, anyway, since we got to talk about your SID synths, I think we also need to bring up your Remix 64 award-winning remix from a couple of years ago based on 2 Last Ninja tracks, since we're having a bit of a theme going on here. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. For many years, I had played with the thought of making a remix of The Last Ninja 2, The Mansion in-game track.
Yeah.
And I was just waiting for the right moment to do so. And one night, I think this was in 2014, it just came to me and I started working on it. And it became a medley of 2 Last Ninja tracks. The Mansion from The Last Ninja 2, and then the level 3 in Last Ninja 1 that we've talked about before.
Palace Gardens.
Yeah, the Palace Gardens. And I arranged a mix out of those 2 tracks, and it gave me an idea of a medley, Yeah. So I gave the track the title The Mansion Gardens, mixing like a mixture of the 2 original titles. And
it's not a mashup per se, but just a mixture of two songs back to back, sort of.
Yeah, the Palace Gardens theme comes in the end of the medley.
Yeah.
I was so hugely inspired by the initial creating of that remix that I completed the arranging, recording, mixing, and mastering in just 3 days and 3 nights, because I didn't almost sleep for 3 days. But
that's insane.
Yeah, but it's when you get inspired by something like that, it's sort of difficult to do anything else than keep on working on it.
Yeah, I know.
And I wanted the track to continue some human elements and not only synthesizer. So I asked my wife, Manna, who's a professional singer, to, lay down some improvising vocal tracks on top of the whole layers of synthesizer and loops and percussions. And I think that the result of her vocals really is the extra spice that made people like that remix and vote for it and gave me the award.
Yeah, the vocals definitely bring the whole thing to a new level. Lots of heart and mind put into a remix inspired by a game series that took much of our blood, sweat, and maybe even tears. So, a well-deserved award, and deserves another listen. So we're gonna put it on right here, right now. Enjoy. So there you go. That's Bob with Manna and the Mansion Gardens. Excellent. I think we should move on to talk about the graphics in the Last Ninja trilogy, since it's a topic that hasn't really been touched yet. So, graphically speaking, what's the first image that pops into your head when thinking about the Last Ninja?
I think it's the traditional Japanese gate, and I had to Google that. They are called torii.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think they're very beautiful. I can just stare at those forever. And
yeah.
And of course, the very first screen in game in the Last Ninja 1, the very first starting game, the ninja is facing northeast, and the distorted bell dong, starting, you know. That's very significant for me in my ninja memories. And I also think about the dragon in it's in the first level, in the end of the first level in the Last Ninja. That spits fire on you that you have to put him to sleep with one of those smoke bombs, you know.
Yeah.
The oriental architecture with, you know, neat little passages and gardens and flowers and fountains.
Yeah.
That's very cute and very beautiful and very calming. It's a very soothing feeling to just be around in that environment. And of course, in Last Ninja 2, the environment is modern. You know, there's like cars, traffic lights, office building, helicopter. In a way, I think that graphically, Last Ninja 2 is extremely good.
Yeah.
It's a bit difficult to compare with the Last Ninja 1 because of the big environment differences.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lot of imagery for to start with.
I drifted away a bit there. You asked me about the first image, and then I just got
rambling on. Yeah.
I got into a rampage again.
Yeah, but I know exactly what you mean, though. It brings a lot of images into your mind and evokes memories.
Yeah, and I mean, graphically, it's an interesting thing about especially Last Ninja 1, that there's a lot of small pixel details all over the screen that sometimes looks like graphical bugs.
Yeah.
There's this sort of random, it looks almost just like randomly inserted pixels, and it looks a little bit dirty all over the place, like in the grass lawns. In the first stage in Last Ninja 1, there's like a small random looking pixels making unreal shapes. And every time I played the game, this was on cassette because I didn't have a disc version until a few years later. Every time I played the game, I could swear that those pixels looked different every time I played the game. Like, very weird. Like, and that was actually a fact with many tape cassette games on the C64 because of the way you load it. I mean, some games could go loaded, like you load the game, but with graphical bugs and still fully playable. I noted that with actually many games back in the days, that the tape struggled to load, but avoided the load error. There was like good enough information to avoid the load error message, but there were graphical and sometimes audible bugs because of a sort of a bad, like not a perfect loading. And of course, this never happened when loading from disk, but it was an interesting aspect of the tape cassette loading procedure.
Yeah, that's a funny thing you mentioned about loading games of the Commodore 64, because they might load okay and work completely, but there could be some slight bugs. I've seen that a few times myself. As for the Last Ninja trilogies, I don't know if you call them Terran graphics or what, because they're not all just background either. There's so much little details in the series graphics and so much variation too. It all feels very organic in a way, even though most of the details are just simple pixels standing still. But then, you know, all those little animated details like the dragons and the helicopters and fountains and other things, those make a huge difference in the big picture.
I find the graphics in Last Ninja 3 to be pretty messy. actually.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, apart from the epic intro, which was the coolest thing I've seen in my life at the time, and they really nailed that part. I think the third game graphically is probably the weakest of the three, without saying that it's bad. It's just previous two games, they set the bar very high.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It is messy in many ways, and I think it's because of I guess you'd call it desperation to get the game look as good on an 8-bit platform as on the 16-bits, which were at that point the main focus for most developers and publishers. But there's a lot of good in Last Ninja 3's graphics too. There's just, I think there's just too much of it, you know? That said, I think all three games have the mostly perfect graphics in their own ways to get the atmosphere right and connect with the music too. It's like, you know, the music and graphics from the C64 versions are practically inseparable. What do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect that I have reflected on, but not enough many times, that the three games are very different from each other, but individually the music, atmosphere, and the graphics are merged together with like great artistic craftsmanship by the System 3 crew.
Oh, speaking of which, I'd like to mention that System 3 is still very much alive and are currently, finally, working on a remastered Last Ninja Trilogy as it happens. It's apparently going to be released on PC and some of the current consoles, which I don't really care about, but they're going for a crowdfunding campaign anytime now, which should be interesting. At least it makes for an interesting conversation piece. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's been 27 years since the last game, and generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of remake of games. You know, there has to be a meaning for a remake, you know.
Yeah.
I like the original games. I like their soundtrack, their atmosphere, and overall epic feel, you know. A remake would probably have modern, upgraded music, which would be the first turn off.
Yeah.
And then it would probably try to please the casual gamer to get, you know, more attention. I mean, it's possible. I mean, but even if System 3 makes a remake that I won't be thrilled about, it won't take away the fact that they did epic stuff in the 80s and 90s. I mean, let's see, you know, I most likely will take a look at a trailer or whatever they release, you know, and more ninja for the people, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sort of getting the same feeling here. I don't mind remakes, really, because there are some fantastic ones around. But, you know, the Last Ninja Trilogy is something that would need to be upgraded very carefully. I don't know how, but it's a potentially dangerous idea to get into this.
Yeah, I think remakes should be made for games that had a good idea but sucked. You know, that would be a great reason to make a remake. You know, I mean, the original Last Ninja games are perfect, and they more than, you know, stand on their own feet. You know, I don't really want to sound like a cynic, but if the remake will make more people interested in the original games, that's only a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I completely agree on your point about remaking games that sucked the first time around into better games, which actually has been done a few times as well, but that's getting off topic. You know, I'm hoping for the same result, more people getting into the original trilogy.
Someone should make a remake for Drac.
Yeah, someone should also make a remake for PC Fuzz.
Oh, really?
I'm actually waiting for this remastered trilogy to happen, for better or for worse. Although actually I'd be much more interested in Last Ninja 4 for the Commodore 64, if anything.
Oh yeah, me too. But we both wish System 3 all the best with the remake.
Yep.
Retrogame Talkshow.
So, now we're nearing the end of our Last Ninja special, and it's time to pay a tribute to the late, great Anthony Lees, the co-composer of the soundtrack for the first game in the trilogy. But he did a few other notable things as well in his sadly short career as a game composer, most of which were done for the Commodore 64.
Yeah, and what could be more fitting than to sit back and enjoy Anthony Lee's work? My pick is the loading track for the Wilderness level in The Last Ninja 1. Let's enjoy it.
A memorable tune indeed, that's a good choice. Wilderness Loader from The Last Ninja 1. And some say this was Anthony's own personal favorite from the soundtrack too, so if this is true, it could be a very fitting choice in that sense as well. But of course, as it happens, each of us had to choose our own tracks to play because our tastes differ enough. Besides, just one song from anyone's entire catalog just doesn't really give a fair representation, now does it? For me, choosing a track to listen to from Anthony's catalog was more difficult. My personal favorite from the Last Ninja 1 soundtrack is the in-game track for the Dungeons level, which is insanely atmospheric.
Yeah, the soundscape that Anthony created here is extremely fitting to the horror dungeon setting. It also shows what can be done with the Commodore 64 SID sound chip.
Exactly, that's as good a reason as any to play the game fully. And I just realized, though, none of the games in the trilogy, at least the C64 versions of them, have any sound effects in them. Not that they need any.
Yeah, that's an interesting point we haven't mentioned yet. There's no sound effects in the game. It might sound odd to some, but I can guarantee you guys that thanks to its amazing soundtrack, you don't even think about any missing sound effects.
Yeah. Oh, but we got sidetracked again. So anyway, my choice from Anthony Lee's repertoire is from another game entirely. The theme tune from a game called Street Warriors, a game from a group called Daisysoft released in 1989 by Silverbird. While the game isn't much to talk about, the music brings it up a good deal, and I think this serves as a good example of Anthony's diversity as a SID composer. So let's hear it.
Yeah. That was the theme from Street Warriors, composed by Anthony Lees. Jari, you've done some digging into Anthony's history as a game composer. What have you found?
His catalog on the C64 consists only of 7 games, of which the Last Ninja soundtrack is the obvious high point. And the dungeon tune from The Last Ninja 1 was also used in the Ninja Remix game from 1990. And from what I've read, he was chosen to split the composing work for The Last Ninja 1 with Ben Daglish, based on a track he wrote for a contest to score an imaginary game in the Zap 64 magazine. Other C64 games featuring his music are Captain America in the Doom Tube of Dr. Megaloman from 1987, Dream Warrior and Rainbow Dragon from 1988, and then there's Incredible Shrinking Sphere, and of course Street Warriors, we just heard, from 1989. And then he moved on to make music on the Atari ST for a couple of games. There was a game called Brat from 1991. And he also did the ST soundtrack for the Incredible Shrinking Sphere. Some sources say he also made music on the Commodore Amiga, but I haven't found any evidence to support that claim.
Okay.
Yeah, he quitted the game music scene around 1991 to 1992. I haven't really found an exact date on that, but according to the info database at mobygames.com, he did some non-musical work for a couple of games in 2010 and 2011 for some modern platforms. That is, if this is the same Anthony Lees they've documented there.
Yeah, nice history digging there, Jari. And if you guys go to the YouTube version of this episode, there are links in the description to some of the amazing tracks that Anthony Lees wrote.
Yep. Pay your own tributes and listen to some Anthony Lees music, everybody.
Yep.
Retrogame Talkshow.
We still haven't really discussed on which one of the 3 games is our favorite. So, Bob, what's your favorite Last Ninja?
It's definitely one of the first 2. Because I remember when Last Ninja 3 came out, apart from that amazing intro, and it felt great that the game was back, and it was amazingly cool to see that. This was 1991, the third game came out, and I think it's because of my age. I was already 15 years old, and I've already started to play games on my Atari ST.
Yeah.
And also, it was just a feeling, it was kind of a melancholic feeling to play the game, because I could sense that this is the last game in the series.
Yeah.
You sort of, I don't know how that feeling came about, but this feeling that this is sort of an end of an era.
Yeah.
When I played that game.
Yeah, I think it's only logical because of how things developed to that point. I mean, games were starting to be developed on the 16-bit platforms at the time, and this sort of isometric adventure thing just didn't really sell that well on the 16 bits. I don't know why, but
it felt like an end of an era, not only for the Last Ninja series, but also for the Commodore 64. There was sort of, I think, less games being released on the C64, and
definitely.
Also in the computer magazine that I was subscribing to, Dato magazine, there were less and less C64 games being reviewed, and more Amiga, Atari,
PC.
You could sort of feel that the business were leaving the C64 a bit. So so my favorite game is, that's difficult, but it's like the Last Ninja 1 is of course the first game, and that was epic in so many ways. I was a little bit younger, and it was the first game. That's always special. I think if I would try to judge with my brains only, I think that Last Ninja 2 is a better game. I think that Last Ninja 2 has even better graphics, and the music is also really good. Music is good in both 1 and 2, and but we also discussed earlier about it's difficult to compare them because of the environmental differences, you know.
Yeah, and the same
Last
goes.
Ninja 2.
Same goes for Last Ninja 3. The environment is very different, and the music is still great and fits the environment very nicely. Just it's difficult to make a decision upon this point because each of the 3 games have so much to offer that any of the others doesn't have. So,
but I think I remember when Last Ninja 2 came out. I mean, the expectations were extremely high, and the game lived up to all of those expectations. And if I'm correctly understood, on Lemon 64 page, I think Last Ninja 2 is one of the highest rated games. I think it's the highest in the series. We might have to check that up. Meanwhile, we are recording this. but I think I've seen Last Ninja 2 having a bit higher rating than Last Ninja 1. But that's not really important at the moment. But it's difficult to judge because the feeling, the nostalgic value of Last Ninja 1 is sort of higher. It's stronger than the Last Ninja 2. But I think that's what I can come up with to answer that difficult question, you know. What about you? How did you differ the 3 games? And
well, for me, the first game has the better soundtrack. It's just a matter of opinion, of course, but the soundtrack makes up for so much of all those games. And I think the graphics also speak to me on a more personal level in the first game. But I do have to agree that Last Ninja 2 is better in gameplay. And I don't know, it's just the first 2 games are so damn good that it's hard to decide upon those 2 which one of the better, you know. But I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah. Last Ninja 1 has so much Asian, Oriental feel to it, and that's really something that I'm attracted to.
Yeah.
And then the Last Ninja 2 has this super modern that still fits in there somehow. You feel so alone. You feel so much more exposed in that environment as a ninja, you know.
Yeah.
Like he's not in his friendly nature environment, so it became sort of scary climbing down in sewers and going in offices, but it still worked really well, you know.
And of course Last Ninja 3 has the amazing intro and ending sequences and everything, and it has more gameplay elements in it. So I would say if I were to pick one Last Ninja game of all 3, I would still pick all the 3 of them in a combined whole. Because it's impossible to make such a decision upon 3 so great games.
Yeah.
On a nostalgic level, though, the first game is my choice.
It was so typical for the time, late 80s, to you play a game, you get stuck, and you have no one to ask for help from.
Yeah.
There was no internet. You came to the school the next day, and then hey, what am I supposed to do there when I reach that wall, you know? Oh yeah, you gotta get that claw from that lion statue, whatever it was, you know. Oh, okay, cool. And then you couldn't wait to get home.
Yeah.
And perform those actions, you know.
Yeah.
School was boring as soon as you found out what to do. To go through. Like just dreaming away those last lessons in school, you know.
Yeah. Great stuff.
Yeah, I think it's time to say goodbye for this time. You know, making an episode dedicated to The Last Ninja and Anthony Lee's was definitely not without emotions, I can tell you that. We hope that you guys have enjoyed our time traveling as much as we did.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. But you know what? I think we can now safely promise to get back into the 16-bit computers in our next episode. So getting to some Atari ST, Commodore Amiga and all that. No idea when, but that's definitely going to be our next stop.
Yeah, I actually listened to our previous episode to get into the mood for this recording.
Yeah.
And the Random Ramblings episode from 22nd of May. And I have to apologize for making that promise, because I promised, we're going to talk about Police Quest. We're going to talk about, 16-bit. So, but, things happened and we got onto a break, and then we decided to do this Anthony Lee's Last Ninja dedication. So, but we're going to go back on track now and,
Yeah. So, hey, thanks for listening. And remember to check out our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Also, if you enjoy our show, please consider supporting us on Ko-fi and Patreon. This is Jari signing out.
And this is Bob saying goodbye.